Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Come On Shine, and today I'm going to talk about the study of poetry by Matthew Arnold. So Matthew Arnold started his career as a poet, then became a critic and wrote his first criticism book in 1853, Preface to the Poems. Now firstly talk a little bit about his criticism. Basically, he composed two types of criticism. First, literary criticism based on literature. Secondly, socio-ethical criticism, which is based on society. And his famous work, Culture and Anarchy, comes under this category itself. And literary criticism can also be divided into two parts, theoretical criticism and practical criticism. And Preface to the Poems, practical criticism and study of poetry comes under theoretical criticism. Okay, so before going to the topic, one more thing I'd like to highlight here, that Matthew Arnold highly influenced by his father Thomas Arnold, who was the principal of Rugby School. Matthew Arnold wrote a book named Rugby Chapter on the death of his father. Now come to the topic, the study of poetry. As we know that Arnold belongs to Victorian age, where industrialization was happening, people were moving towards sciences and having faith on Darwin's theory. So Arnold said in the study of poetry that the future of poetry is immense. All our creeds and religion have been shaken. They have grown too much tied down to facts. But for poetry, the idea is everything. The strongest part of our religion today is its unconscious poetry. Means the future of poetry can be so bright in this age because people are moving towards facts and logic and having less faith on the religion. Hence, poetry can be the substitute of the religion and can show the civilized path to the people, and people would make poetry as their ideal in life. Means people can have more faith on poetry, which can guide them, okay, show them the path, the real path, the right path, okay. And Arnold also promotes poetry by convincing people to study poetry more and more. And he also says that science will remain incomplete without poetry. One day it will also replace philosophy also. Hence poetry is divine and soulful. Then he suggests that to maintain the truthfulness and beauty of poetry, poets should always use some laws. In other words, he says that vulgarity should not be used in poetry to remain at classical and devotional and high level. Okay. Then he also suggests to readers how to read poetry. For this, he has given the Touchstone method. In Touchstone method, he says to select some poems by the great poets like Homer, Dante, Shakespeare and Milton and memorize it. Actually, when you go through the poems of such poets, you can feel the seriousness and truthfulness. And that Arnold says to compare poems which you are reading with the poems written by Homer, Dante, Shakespeare and Milton. And if it sounds almost the same, then your poem will be measured as a good poem or classical poem. And this method is called the Touchstone method. And he gives 3 estimates to measure a poem. Firstly, a personal estimate, a real estimate and historical estimate. Okay. So basically he says that diction and accent will be the best if a poem carries truthfulness and seriousness. Okay, and he reviews so many great poets such as Chaucer and Burns and compare them with some other poets to prove this fact, the seriousness, the truth. For Chaucer's poems, he says that there is truthfulness we can see, but it lacks seriousness. He says that Shakespeare's and Milton's poems are more classical than Chaucer's. Okay? Then he compares Dryden and Pope's poem to Thomas Gray's and says Gray's poems are classical, more classical, because it has high seriousness. Then Arnold also praises Robert Burns' Scottish poetry, but it also lacks high seriousness. Means he says that Robert Burns' Scottish poetry is also very fine, good poetry, but it also lacks high seriousness. And he says you will be little misguided when you see it on the personal estimate. Okay, when you go through the Burns poetry and measure it with a personal estimate, then it can. And at last, Arnold closes his essay by returning to the prediction he made in the beginning. Poetry's high destiny in human affairs will ensure that it never fades or perishes. And if it seems at times that society turns away from poetry, this is only temporary, since human being will always return to poetry in times of great need. And he also says that a good poetry, a fine poetry, a classical poetry will always be good in all the ages. Perhaps it can have some vulgarity by the passing of times, but it always remain good, fine poetry. Okay, that's all for today's video. We will meet soon. Till then, bye, goodbye, take care, and keep loving literature.